Hello and welcome to the latest in the World Cup preview here on Celtic Down Under. Today, after the previous teams we've covered, we are covering Ecuador with myself, Laura, and joining me is Liam. How you doing, Liam?
Yeah, good. Interesting to take a wee dive into a team today that I know almost nothing about.
Well, there's one name that springs to mind for me, and that's about as much as I know about it as well. But we'll get into that. And you have a particularly interesting story you were talking about just before we went on to record, which I'm
Hmm.
looking forward to hearing a little bit more about as well. So we will start obviously with Ecuador, the last of the first group of teams that we've been looking at,
Yeah,
in the same group as, obviously, to recap, Netherlands, Qatar, and Senegal. Um, they are the opposition in the curtain raiser, making it not so much of a glamour tie, you might say. But
yeah,
ask a few people in the know about South American football, and there's maybe a little bit more to Ecuador than you might first think, isn't there?
yeah. Ecuador are kind of like, if you want to make a European comparison, they're a bit like Belgium in the sense that maybe 20 years ago
Mm-hmm.
they were a World Cup make weight. They'd maybe be good for the second round and not much else. But then, as time went on, Belgium improved and got to a point where they're now a genuine competitor for the tournament. Now, Ecuador aren't at that stage yet, but in a South American context, they've gone from being an also ran to a consistent competitor in Copa America, and they finished fourth in South American qualifying,
Mm-hmm.
ahead of teams like Peru, Colombia, the sort of countries that you're used to almost always seeing at the World Cup.
Mm. Yeah, when the teams ahead of them are Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay, as it was in those top three spots, then you see the quality of opposition they're having to play against just to even get a chance to get into the tournament. I think it was something like, it says here, actually, 7 wins, 5 draws, and 6 defeats that earned them 26 points in that group. So not an
Mm.
insignificant amount of wins there for them to get there. I think as a Eurocentric person, certainly I have a maybe an unfair impression in my head that it's relatively easy for the South American teams to qualify, but it doesn't seem to be the case when you actually look into it a bit deeper.
No, no, absolutely not. I mean, like you say, when only the top four qualify automatically, and you're in there with Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay, you're already thinking, all right, basically you've got about five or six possible teams fighting for one spot. Um, and then obviously Peru had the opportunity to qualify via the continental playoff, but they were then beaten by Australia. So
Hmm.
um, there is a potential for five South American teams to get there, but it's not definitely not guaranteed. Um, yeah.
It certainly isn't guaranteed. It's difficult. It's difficult to judge them because I'm not a regular viewer of South American World Cup qualifying. I'm not sure how regular a viewer you are, but
Mm.
given the kind of, I think we talked Qatar up fairly well in our review of their national team. It's not going to be an easy one for Ecuador as their opening match. I mean, it never is when you're talking about the going up against the hosts in the opening day, is it?
No, I mean historically as well, the opening day is a game where this quote unquote smaller teams sometimes kind of step up to the plate and do something special. Thinking like Cameroon in 1990, Senegal in 2002. These are the kind of shocks that you can get on match day one.
Or
Um,
the one that always springs to mind for me is, to quote the kind of opposite of what you're saying there, is South Africa were very much the underdogs at their own World Cup, and those goals by Shabalala in the opening matches are forever etched on my mind as kind of the South African World Cup in 2010 bursting onto the scene. So who knows what we're going to see in that opening match?
Yeah, yeah, and Qatar will also have the same pressure that South Africa had because South Africa ultimately became the first host nation not to get beyond round one,
Mm.
and Qatar are being heavily touted as potentially that as well. So beating Ecuador is going to be key to them avoiding that fate. But as we're about to get into, Ecuador will be no pushovers.
There will be no pushovers. Now, before we came on, we were obviously talking about Moises Caicedo, who's the kind of star name for Ecuador, and we will get into him in a little bit. But you were talking about potential unrest, some controversy, if you want to put it that way, that dogged Ecuador in the lead up to this World Cup. I wasn't aware of it whatsoever. What exactly was going on there?
Right. Well, basically, what happened was there was a controversy where actually going back to something we talked about previously in our Qatar episode, the idea of citizenship versus country of birth. During the qualifiers, Ecuador fielded a player who was born in Colombia but has lived in Ecuador from a very young age and is an Ecuadorian citizen. However, his country of origin, if you like, didn't come to light until after the qualifiers. So the two teams immediately behind Ecuador in the playoffs, namely Peru and Colombia, both lodged formal complaints with FIFA demanding that Ecuador be kicked out of the tournament. Because in their eyes, they fielded an ineligible player. Now, that was kicked out by FIFA. FIFA upheld the fact that this guy is an Ecuadorian by everything except birth, which, as we discussed last week, if a country grants you citizenship, then you're qualified to play for that country under FIFA rules. That's that, unless you've already played for somebody else, right? Now, where it gets complicated is that the respective FAs, Peru and Colombia, have now taken this to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. And as we discuss this, it is now early evening on November 4th in Japan, early morning for you, and the case is due to go before the court later today, South American time.
Okay.
So we may well record this and then find out tomorrow that they've been kicked out of the tournament, but I don't think that's going to happen. Because even if the Court of Arbitration for Sport ruled against them, they would appeal that, and the appeal would last longer than the tournament. So, and FIFA's stance is always that teams are not kicked out until full investigations are completed, unless there's an allegation of criminality. But there is no allegation of criminality here. It's purely about registration. So.
I'm unaware of any criminality associated with this World Cup whatsoever, but the less said about that, the better. It's not just the issues that you've talked about that have dogged Ecuador in the run up to the World Cup either. I mean, their management situation has been pretty volatile as well. They had let me just see if I can find Hernan Gomez was the manager. Up until a pretty disappointing run at the 2019 World Cup, after which he was relieved of his duties, at which point Jorge Silico took over for 5 friendlies in the autumn. And then a strange thing happened. Son of the great Johan Cruyff, Jordi Cruyff, took charge of the team, but then left in July of 2020, having not taken charge of a single match, obviously because of COVID. So I mean, it's an interesting one. I don't know. Did Sam Allardyce ever take charge of England? That's the only other manager I can think who might have been manager without ever taking charge of a single match. But anyway, they are a bit more stable now with Argentine Gustavo Alvaro taking the reins. And it remains to be seen exactly what they offer going into the tournament. Do you think that kind of upset, even though it is a little bit of a while ago now, is that likely to affect them in any way, do you think, going into this tournament?
To be honest, probably not, because I think that upset, like you say, it dates back to 2020 when their qualification for the World Cup was still very much up in the air. And since then, the team have got their head down and got the job done. So clearly this coach is taking them in the right direction. What would worry me, though, if I were Ecuadorian, is that if they go to this World Cup and then don't get beyond round 1, which, let's face it, they are the rank outsiders to do so from this group, that you might have just the reflex of sacking the manager because we didn't get through round one.
Yeah.
And that would be a shame because what this coach is doing with Ecuador at the moment is pretty special. So he should not be judged on a World Cup where they are in as tough a group as could be. The Asian champions, the African champions, and one of the tournament favourites all in the same
Mm-hmm.
group with them. It really is. It's a tough group for them. Ordinarily you wouldn't fear facing Qatar, but facing Qatar in their own country, with their own fans, when you know that this is a tournament they've spent decades preparing for, it's going to be a hard task for them to get anything out of that first game. And the problem is with, as we said before, World Cup groups being what they are, if Ecuador don't take at least a point from that first game, they
Mm-hmm.
then go into the second game saying, "Oh no, lose this and we're out."
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a tough one. It's
It,
definitely a tough one.
before we go on to talk about the individuals that might have an impact, I'm just looking through some of the results here. I mean, they they're not they're not exactly pushovers like we've said already. They beat Uruguay 4-2 at home. They went away to Bolivia, which we all know is a difficult place to go because of altitude, if nothing else.
Hmm.
And got a 3-2 win there, and then had a 6-1 trouncing of Colombia, which was Colombia's heaviest defeat since 1977, according to the records that I'm looking at there. Um, you know, a, a team that a team that you might on the surface think are going to definitely be also runs here, but they're not without pedigree when you look at results like that.
No, and more recently, I saw them play out a goalless draw with Japan,
Mm-hmm.
but that game was played, I believe, in Germany. So Japan's team had pretty much all of their European stars, including a couple from Celtic,
Mm-hmm.
um, and Ecuador were probably the better team in that game.
Mm-hmm.
It could have gone either way, but Ecuador looked good. They definitely looked better than I was expecting of them because I hadn't seen them going into that game. And Japan didn't play badly, but Ecuador played very well and matched them. And if they can match a team like Japan, then you would then say, well, surely then they've got a good chance of matching the likes of Qatar and Senegal,
Mm-hmm.
if not Holland.
Yeah, I mean, they've got pedigree at the World Cup. We all know that it took a David Beckham free kick. I think it was France '98 to knock them out in the round of 16. But you're talking about over 20 years ago now where that happened. So how much bearing that has on current day is remains to be seen. But speaking of present day, the name that's on everybody's lips from an Ecuadorian point of view is Moises Caicedo. Plays
Hmm.
for Brighton and Hove Albion at the moment. Made his debut for his national team back in 2020. Still relatively young, so obviously his first taste of a tournament of this scope on the national stage.
Hmm.
Um, I've liked what I've seen of him. How much of an impact do you think he can have, or do you think he will be asked to do a role that means that he can't have that much of an offensive impact in these games?
Well, it really depends on what the players in front of him are able to accomplish. Because if you watch the way he plays for Brighton, he's very much like for want of a better phrase, the box to box midfielder. One
Mm-hmm.
minute he's on the edge of his own penalty area, next minute he's taking a shot from the opposite penalty area.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but with a team like Ecuador, who are going to come under pressure in all three of their games, you're probably going to see a lot more of the defensive side of him than the attacking side, I think. So
Yeah.
it's going to fall to the players in front of him to actually probably make make the chances happen. I would use the comparison for our Scottish listeners. I would use the comparison of, think about how Callum McGregor plays for Celtic and how he plays for Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
Right, he is deployed in a bit of a freer role when he plays for Scotland, which is why you see him getting goals for Scotland more often.
Yeah.
Whereas at Celtic, he is the anchor man that allows the more creative players in front of him to do the kind of the flair stuff. So I think it will be the same with this guy in the Ecuador midfield. I think he's going to be sitting a bit deeper than you might see him at Brighton.
It'll be interesting to see, that's for sure. I mean, I don't know about you, Liam, but I think we've done well enough filling 15 minutes with our knowledge of Ecuador. Um, I
I would
think
just add, there's one more player I would say you should look out for.
go for it.
Every team has a kind of cult hero, right? Not necessarily the best player on the team, but the one that all the fans love.
Okay,
And there's a guy who plays for Ecuador called Angel Mena,
okay.
and he is a 34-year-old winger. Plays for Club Leon in Mexico, and he is one of those guys who, again, to make a Celtic comparison, a bit like Joe Hart in the sense that he's an old head who everybody in the dressing room looks up to,
Mm-hmm.
and who leads by example on the pitch. Um, but he may be reduced to a bit part player in the tournament because of his age and because of the conditions that there's going to be in Qatar. But then again, if anybody's equipped to handle heat and humidity, it's probably Ecuadorians. So, yeah, he is one to look out for. Are we, not a star player, but Angel Mena, one to watch.
These wee nuggets are what we're here for. Just shows that hopefully when he does do something of note during those three group games, we can turn around and say, or Liam can turn around and say at least that he knew better. So it'll be interesting to be seen. We'll close this particular review out the way we always do, Liam.
Hmm.
Bearing in mind everything you've said about the rest of the group, what are Ecuador's chances here of getting? I mean, I presume you don't think they're going to threaten the trophy in any way, but
No.
how do you think they're going to get on in terms of maybe getting out of the group?
Realistically, I don't think they will. It's a shame because they're a decent team, but I just think they're up against the hosts who are going to be under a great deal of pressure to get at least out of the group.
Mm-hmm.
They're up against, in my opinion, one of the best teams at the tournament in the Netherlands, and Senegal, who on their day can give anybody a game.
Yeah.
So really, people were saying Qatar were the ones that would finish bottom of this group, but based on what we talked about before and the further reading that I've done into the situation in Qatar, I really don't think that will happen. I think Ecuador are going to be not the whipping boys of the group because they're going to be competitive, but I could easily see them losing all three games, unfortunately.
I could see actually the other three teams in the group really those three places being up for grabs between the three of them, because we all know Netherlands, you never know which version of them is going to turn up. Qatar are going to have that extra impetus, like you said, and Senegal have that magic touch of somebody like Sadio Mane that is definitely going to potentially throw a spanner in the works for any of the opposition on their day. So it'll be an interesting group to watch, that's for sure. And with
Yeah,
that said, that's Group A covered for you. We will move on to Group B and the rest of the World Cup teams in the run up to Qatar 2022 here on Celtic Down Under. Liam, thank you very much for joining me for this one, and I'll see you
thank
for
you.
the next one.
See you then.